My name is Tiffany Mueller, and I am the Equity SEL and Social Studies Coordinator at Lake County Regional Office of Education. I'm with you today to talk to you about your equity journey. Today, we may be discussing some items that are stressful, that may bring up some emotions. So if at any point in time you feel that way, feel free to pause the video, come back when you're ready, or if you're not ready at all, that's okay too. Your equity journey is your journey. It's on no one else's timeline. And the questions that you ask yourself today are important. But if you can't be honest, then I'm not sure if you'll get the full effect of the presentation. To begin, I'd like us to take a deep breath in on a 4 count and exhale. Really push that breath out on a 7 count. Ready? Inhale. Exhale. Let's do that again. Inhale. Exhale. Part of doing that is that it actually relaxes your central nervous system. It instigates your parasympathetic nervous system to react. So your shoulders come down, you're not sweating, your mouth isn't dry unless you're talking. And it's to start off with a much calmer sense of being. So let's begin. What you should expect today is that we would typically engage in an equity conversation that feel productive in order to gain a new level of discourse about issues of oppression and privilege. I'm also hoping that we have time to examine inequity, oppression, and implicit biases as a lens to support reflection and action towards achieving educational equity. What I'd like to start with is, I'm sure you've seen Simon Sinek, The Golden Circle TED Talk. And I'd like to start with that today. How great leaders inspire action. It's not just about inspiring action in others, it's about inspiring action in yourself. So everyone knows what we do. We're educators. We teach. We guide children to their potential, to sometimes it's just the learning standard of the day, but we guide them. We teach them. How do we do this? We can go into, if we want to talk about grist trading, we want to talk about concentric circles or carousels or Nearpods or pear decks or bell ringers, exit slips. There's so many different ways as to how we actually teach. But the question I want to start with today is why? Why? Why are you an educator? Why are you an educator in your school? Why are you an educator in your district? I want us to all start with our why today. Feel free to pause the video, take out a sheet of paper, and answer these questions. And be honest. No one's looking over your shoulder. You're not turning it in. We're not doing a think, pair, share. You have the opportunity to sit down and be honest. So pause the video, and when you're ready, come back. I hope you were able to answer those questions, and I hope you feel better. I'm going to take a sip of water real quick. So what we would be doing is we would be doing a diversity round and organizing ourselves by where we're from, what kind of student we were, and our racial identity. So part of what I want to talk about is, where are you from? What impact do you believe this has had on your identity? What impact does where you're from have on your identity? Does it? It might. What type of student were you? How might that impact the type of educator you are now? I lived in an A and B house, so there were no C's or D's, and there would be no F's. That's how I grew up, and that greatly impacted me as an educator. It impacted my classroom design, my classroom rules. I was very strict at the beginning of my education career, but I grew to be flexible. Some might say too flexible, but it was really important to me to show students that what they did in high school did not define them for the rest of their lives. And then your racial identity. In what ways do you believe race has impacted your identity? As a Caucasian cisgender female, my racial identity has impacted myself because as an educator, I was more familiar with my background, my perspective. And at first, it was very hard for me to understand what was going on in the lives of my students. And even if the students did look like me, or came from a similar background as me, or the same type of student as me, students in 2021 are very, very different than how I was 30 years ago. They are dealing with what I believe to be way more issues than I know I did at 17. So when we talk about all of this and we talk about your equity journey, we need to really look at what is the problem to solve. And to achieve educational equity for the most underserved and marginalized students, there is a need to close the opportunity gap, not just the outcomes of the achievement gap. The largest part of equity work is looking at that opportunity gap. And once you identify what that opportunity gap is, you will be able to start to work on those perceived achievement gaps. Working towards equity means eliminating the predictability of success and failure that currently correlates with any social or cultural factor. Interrupting these inequitable practices, challenging biases, and creating inclusive school environments for all. Part of this is really looking at the processes that are in place that don't factor in the marginalized students. If you can walk into a classroom and you can predict who will succeed and who will not because of any outside factor other than intelligence, other than level of ability, that is an inequitable practice and that needs to be eliminated. So what are we looking at here? What are some of the processes and policies you have that do not allow opportunities or eliminate opportunities? A big one lately are dress codes. The Crown Act was put into place by Illinois. It was accepted. So we cannot be biased against hair. Tardy policies, late work policies, grading policies, ability to provide tutoring for students. If it's only offered before and after school, How are students getting access to it? Are we acknowledging that there could be other things going on at home that prevent them from coming early or staying late? Where's the tutoring built into the day? It's a lot of questions, and it is work, but it's good work. And right now, if anything I've said has made you start feeling a little bit of stress, pause, come back. You're more than welcome to do that. Turn off if you want to, but go back and take that deep breath in. Take that deep breath in on a count of 4 and exhale it on a count of 7. But remember, equity work is good work, and equity work is everyone's work. So what gets in the way of this equity work, of this good work, of the ideas that school systems have? And it's the gap between our intention for a quality education for every child and the actions we take and conditions we provide that prevent students from succeeding to their full potential. No one gets into teaching because they hate kids. People get into teaching because they want to be that person in someone's life. They want to educate about history and English and science and math and the beautiful world of music and art. And I can't forget PE. I can't forget PE. But our intention is great, but it's the actions we take and the conditions we provide that prevent some of our students from succeeding. And that's where we have to take a step back and really look at our policies and procedures. So let's go back to another why question. Why is equity important to discuss in your district? What's going on? Write it down. Sometimes when you write things down, it is much more likely that you'll repeat it or you'll do something. But why is equity important to discuss in your district? Feel free to pause and write it down. So normally in a class, we would take Post-it notes and we would write 1 to 3 questions or comments on it and really start to exchange these, walk around a room and see who else is dealing with the same situations or dealing with the same issues and try to connect and build that network of being able to brainstorm with somebody or sometimes commiserate. But what are the most pressing challenges or questions you have about leading for educational equity? I would suspect that it's not knowing where to start, that you'll say something and offend someone and make it worse, that you'll be in the newspaper, or God forbid, TikTok. And a lot of it has to do with fear of rocking the boat. But the boat needs to be rocked. It needs to be rocked. And slow and steady can be sometimes more for more privileged people than those who deal with that inequity or tension every day. Going slow and steady is trying to make it easier and more acceptable for people who are not negatively impacted by the processes or policies that you have. Oh, the art of listening. I'll be honest. I became a teacher, and I tell my students this. I became a teacher because I love to talk, and I would have a captive audience for 6 hours a day. And also, I would also tease them and say, I like being the smartest person in the room 6 hours a day. But then I would go home and my children would prove me wrong. So the art of listening is so important, especially in equity work, because it is so passion driven, and people who are really passionate about equity work, it can come off as aggressive as opposed to assertive or passionate. And you don't want that, because people will immediately stop listening to you. And you want people to listen to you. You want them to be open to change. So when we talk about the art of listening, most people listen actively for 17 seconds. My children would probably tell you I listen for 5. But most people listen actively for 17 seconds. And we spend 45% of our awake time listening. 80% of awake time is spent communicating. And 75% of the words are ignored, misunderstood, or forgotten. Typically, when we listen, we're waiting for our turn to talk. And with equity work, we have to sit back and listen. We have to really sit and listen. And remember the words, hear all the words, and listen for understanding. Equity work is not just listening, but asking the right questions. And that's where you get all of this started. So let's take a look at constructivist listening purposes. All right. So it is valuable for us to be listened to as we inquire into emotional and intellectual demands of challenging inequity. Constructivist listening structures can serve as a practice space for the deep listening necessary to sustain our alliances across race, class, gender, language, and other forms of difference. It's not listening to wait for when it's our turn. It's listening. It's repeating what someone says. If someone says something and you hear the words, but you're really working with a tone of voice, you want to say, you sound upset. You sound angry. You sound hurt. Can you tell me more about that? So when you start your equity work, one of the best ways to start off your meetings is to use constructivist listening. Is that each person is given that equal time to talk. And listeners do not interrupt or break in with a personal story. I am so guilty of that. So guilty of that. I have a story for everything. Confidentiality is maintained. When you create this equity committee, or if that's what you're doing, or I'm assuming most of you have, or you're doing this equity work and someone is speaking to you, you have to maintain that confidentiality, because the talker might want to confess something or say something, and they believe it's a safe place. But if you turn around and repeat it, all that work you've done is gone. Now, when the talker is the listener, the talker does not criticize or complain about others during their time to talk. It's quid pro quo. You listen to me, I listen to you. So, how do you feel about your own ability to fully listen to others, especially when having difficult conversations? What can be challenging for you? Pause and write it down. For me, I'm afraid that I'll be misunderstood. I am afraid that I won't use the right words. So I'm constantly thinking about how I can make sure that I'm understood. And a lot of times I'm focused on that as opposed to the person in front of me. That's something that can be challenging for me. Who do you struggle to listen to? Who do you need to spend time listening to in order to address equity given your current role? Is it students? Is it parents? Is it teachers? Administrators? Your staff? Remember, in your school, it's not only educators that work with students, that listen to students. Maybe you have security guards or an SRO or custodians, the cafeteria workers, maintenance workers, your school secretaries, who, let's be honest, they really run the school. Where would we be without them? But who do you struggle listening to? So let's talk about the impact of implicit biases. Implicit biases creates unconscious associations that may contradict our intentions, beliefs, and values. So maybe you think, and remember, it's unconscious. Doesn't make it okay, but it's unconscious. So thinking females are weak. How many times have you heard somebody say, where are some big, strong boys that can carry this for me? Girls, why don't you come up here? Your handwriting's prettier. Blondes are dumb. Men are pigs. Boys will be boys. I had this with a family member, and I had to correct them and say, not every brown person is Mexican. There are a plethora of other countries that have brown people in them other than Mexico. And hoodies are not bad. Hoodies do not mean criminals. But these implicit biases that we have, that again, they're unconscious. When we think them, we need to retrain our brain and become consciously aware of, oh, I just did that. And once you can admit it to yourself, the work starts being a lot easier. So unconscious biases towards our students and families will cause us to create and offer support and opportunities that are inequitable, thus creating a privileged system for some and an oppressive system for others. To achieve educational equity for the most underserved and marginalized students, there's a need to close that opportunity gap. We have got to close the opportunity gap. And part of that work is acknowledging our implicit biases, understanding and celebrating the differences in one another, our students, and our communities. So again, this would have been a think, pair, share. But how might our implicit biases impact the students and families that we serve? Pause and answer. How might your implicit biases impact the teachers and staff we lead? Pause and answer. What I want to do right now is I want to show this video. It's called Moving Between the Balcony and the Dance Floor. And when we move between the balcony and the dance floor, it gives us an opportunity to observe and really see what is going on. So let's go ahead and play this.
This idea of being on the dance floor and on the balcony is a great way of thinking about adaptive work. When we're in the middle of the dance floor and we're bumping elbows and butts and elbows and backs bumping into everybody, we're in the middle of everything and we don't have a good perspective of what's really going on.
We spend a lot of time on the dance floor where we're in the midst of the action, where we're moving from one thing to another. And I think that maybe we're not getting the results that we want. To help that is to go up on a balcony and look at what's happening in this organization. Look at the systems and patterns about what different groups are doing, or including yourself, and how are you behaving. We spend most of our time on the dance floor. We're afraid of the balcony. We want to get it done. And it's perfectly human. It's perfectly great. And you can't make progress on an adaptive challenge, on the really important things, the things that we care about in our organizations, if we don't take a little bit of time to notice what's going on. Going to the balcony and looking down on what's going on helps people to change their course of action and try something different. I love sitting in a meeting thinking about getting on the balcony. And what's going on in my head there is that means beam myself up and pretend I'm, floating above the meeting on that little balcony and just check out what's going on down there. How am I deploying myself? What am I, am I asking questions or am I acting like an authority or deferring to some authority? Am I treating this meeting as a chance to make progress on something we all care about, or am I trying to get it done? And so I go up on the balcony to check out what I'm doing, to check out the roles other people are playing.
We all know this to be true in lots of different ways. Think about football teams. They put some coaches in the press box and some coaches on the field. Think about those great athletes who seem to always be able to know where everybody is on the field, even while they're in the midst of the action. But we think leadership is really the same way. You've got to be able to separate yourself, to give yourself space to think about what's adaptive.
So thank you for watching that video. And the biggest part of moving between the balcony and the dance floor that the gentleman hit on was, look at a football team. You have some coaches above in the press box. You have some coaches on the field. What can you do in the next few weeks on your equity journey, on your observation of yourself in your classroom, in your school, in your district? How can you move between the balcony and the dance floor? How can you take a step back and observe what is going on around you and where you can close that opportunity gap and then close the achievement gap? Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope you got a lot out of the presentation. And if you have any other questions, you can contact me at the Lake County Regional Office of Education. You can find me on Twitter at Mueller_teach. And I hope to hear from you. Otherwise, have a wonderful day and take care.